what are we doing in terms of the best practices for bringing all of our education systems together? And as I mentioned, we will have one panelist come in as we're in the middle, but if we could go ahead, and Blaine, would you please start with an introduction?
Hello everybody, my name is Blaine Smith. I am currently the director of the North Far North Regional Consortium, where we manage strong workforce dollars, including K-12 strong workforce dollars now. I am going to be channeling my inner Louise Stymus. If you guys don't know who that is, she is the director of the Sacramento County Office of Ed for Career Education, and so she asked me to fill in today. So I will do my best to channel 30 years of career education and County Office of Education experience through Louise.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Jeffrey Marizik with the California Community College Chancellor's Office. I am in the Workforce and Economic Development Division, and I have the great pleasure of working with Cynthia McFarland on the teacher preparation. So thank you very much for being here today, and we look forward to having a wonderful, rich conversation on looking forward and preparing our teachers as we grow our workforce for the future of work.
Can you hear me without the mic? Yes? Okay. I'm using my teacher voice. So I am Dr. Margarita Jimenez-Silva. I am the Director of Teacher Education at UC Davis. I'm pretty new in my role. I've been there for about a year and a half, but I am a native Californian and so happy to be back in my home state after being in Arizona for 14 years. So I know we think we have a lot of work to do, but when I compare where we are, where other states are, we are way ahead of the game. And not to say we don't have work to do, but I think sometimes when we're in it, we lose sight of the fact that we're actually doing a lot of good work. And even though we're here to focus on how we can do it better, I just want to recognize that having recently come back to the state, we are doing amazing work here.
Excellent. I do want to note to everybody that on your tables there are note cards, and so we're hoping that we will have some time for Q&A. So if at any time during the panel discussion, if something pops up in your mind, if you could please make a note on it on a question card, that would be wonderful, and we'll try our best to run it, going through all those questions at the end. So the first thing for this panel that we're going to do is we're going to have some reflections on the topic for the panel, which is best practices for bringing education systems together to create new, seamless pathways in teacher preparation. And what we're just going to do is some of our panelists are going to do a little bit of an update on kind of what's going on in their system in teacher preparation, and then we'll be talking about best practices. So who would like to start with an update? Excellent.
So I'm here speaking about, and I have to stand up, sorry, I feel like I'm too short. So I'm here representing the UC Irvine. Mike? Okay, no, that's okay. Is that better? Yeah. Okay, so I'm representing the UC system, and my understanding of why the UC system decided to prepare teachers is to have a very different role than what the Cal States do or some of our other partner schools do. In terms of really, our programs are small. We have teacher ed programs in seven, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 of our UC. So the only UC that does not have a teacher ed program is UC San Francisco. And they really range in size from Merced just graduated 2 students last year. So they have their first cohort that they're graduating out of their, it's actually being run out of their extension program. To between UC Davis and UC Irvine, we have the 2 largest programs in teacher ed. Typically we have about 150 students in our teacher prep program, multiple subject and single subject at UC Davis. This year we're a little down as the pattern showing across the country. Our numbers are, we're at 131 incoming, and then we have 150 that are going on to, they came in with their credential last year and are now going on to the master's part of their program, and we have 152 in that part of the program. So we typically around 300 in total. So those are the biggest programs, but like I say, they really range. In terms of the offerings that we have, we also range. At Davis, I can say we have, in multiple subject, we have ag. We have one of the largest we graduated 9 last year, but that's considered one of the bigger programs in terms of ag education in the state. We also do language arts, or English, I should say. We have science, math, social studies, and then multiple subject. So we don't have the wealth of programs that, let's say, San Diego has. So they have a special program just in bilingual. They have multiple languages. They have sign language. And so, again, it really varies across the UCs in terms of the emphases that they have. The other big distinction, I think, with the UCs as compared to some of the other programs is the director of teacher ed really varies across the system, and I think that impacts the program. So there's only 2 of the UCs, UC Berkeley and UC Davis, where we as directors hold an associate professor or a professor position. And so that means that we're trying to split our time between the expectations that we have for the research along with an administrative position, which if you've ever had your hand in administration, it is never a part-time job, no matter what they tell you. So that is a pro and a con in that those of us that have that research are kind of forced to do research on teacher education, because that's the only way that we can keep sane, is to do our research on what we're actually also doing in administration. So I think that's a strength, but also kind of a limitation of the roles that we have. So like I said, we're small. We do have, they started a few years ago this program called CTERN, which is a network. It is a network it's the California Teacher Education Research Improvement Network, where we meet regularly, and they have provided some funding for helping us investigate and do the kind of research that UC teacher ed programs were designed to do. So because our numbers are smaller, because we have a bigger infrastructure for research, we really are trying to say, okay, what are best practices, for example, for supervision? Or we have one on how are we better preparing and recruiting bilingual teachers after we've gone through the age of English only, and now those kids are grown up and thinking about becoming teachers. How do we support those teachers? So there are some specific supports that we can take away from that. And then finally, the idea of the next generation of teacher educators. So especially as we're trying to diversify the teacher ed pipeline, is who are the professors that are teaching those teachers who are going to then go into the classrooms, and really looking at, because we have large doctorate programs, PhD programs, that most of our PhDs actually go into the CSU system. They don't go into our own UC system. How can we better diversify who are going to be the next generation of teacher educators and their understanding of supporting and recruiting our future teachers? So thank you.
Good morning. Well, I'm here to represent the community college system, and I'm probably in the room, most people are familiar with this thing called the 1960s master plan, right? So you kind of know where we fit in the puzzle piece. We're the middle child, right? We're taking the K-12 students who are exploring and curious about the opportunity to become educators, and then moving into preparation, where when they move into our system at the community college, they have 2 years to kind of figure out, hey, that is a career I would like to go into, and then enter some of our programs, and then move on to most often to CSU, who we partner with greatly in terms of where our students go after they complete our teacher preparation programs. One thing I'd like to point out, I think is a very important thing in your packet in front of you, is this letter, and it is a joint letter between the CSU and the community college system that was developed, I believe just last summer, around that time, and was issued, and really was kind of speaking to the importance of the teacher preparation programs statewide, and how we have this intersegmental connection and commitment. And I think that's what really today is fundamentally about, is bringing the systems together to figure out how we make sure that we are creating meaningful pathways to the occupations and the careers of teacher preparation. So in here you can find some links to some of the things that drive our system, like the vision of success and the guided pathways, which help our students find their career, choose it, and be able to know where they're going so they can move quickly through and not get lost through the process, and then move on to being able to get to the credentialing program and processes that happen at the higher levels at CSU and UC. So I do recommend that you read this. I think it's a very great synopsis up to date of what the relationships have been intersegmentally. Why is what we're doing important, and why do we want to talk about best practices and how we do better in terms of guided pathways between K-12 and the other higher ed partners? And we have some evidence. Just yesterday I was at a meeting, and it was with the labor agency, and they handed me this LMI data. And they didn't know we were going to be doing teacher prep today, but when we looked at it, the first top 4 of the occupations, and this is sorted by demand, by the way. The top 4 occupations in demand, you want me to read them? Elementary school teachers, teacher assistants, substitute teachers, secondary school teachers. And the numbers range from about 8,400 to about just over 5,000 needed. And that's an estimate for the next 10 years. This data is from 2016. LMI is always trailing. I'll let you talk about that. But so what's here is we have evidence that there's a demand for teachers, and there's a moment for us to consider as we're moving towards 2020 how to prepare teachers. The best practices, we've been doing this. This isn't something new. Teacher preparation is something. What we're here is to be able to optimize these relationships and optimize the processes for creating meaningful pathways for our students. And so I encourage you today, as you're having conversations, that it's not just a panel of speaking heads, but that you really are building relationships and bridges across the systems so that at the program level, at the regional level, and at the state level, we can come together and create a meaningful transition for our state in terms of our future of work and to help people find the types of careers that are meaningful to them. I have taught at the community college for 15 years, and I can guarantee you that when I was in elementary school, teaching was not on my radar of things I wanted to be when I grew up, nor did I know that I would be here as a dean in education. So the more help that we can help our students explore, define, identify, and commit to a career pathway, the more effective that they can enter the workforce, have a living wage, and be able to enjoy the benefits of contributing to this society of California and the citizens here. So thank you for your time this morning and for sharing your wisdom and experience with each other. And with that, I'll turn it over.
Thank you. So I'm gonna lay out a series of 3 best practices that I know are familiar with in the region here in Sacramento. Selfless plug, if you want to hear more about something that's happening in the region, there's an innovative Paths to Public Service breakout this afternoon that I'll also be facilitating. High school careers and education. So we have influx of funds coming from the state legislature that have funded programs around strong workforce, and that has now entered into CTIG is one aspect of K-12 funding, and then strong workforce, K-12 strong workforce. And so there's this notion of leading people to successful, high-paying jobs, or at least a living wage job, and education does that. And so there's a lot of flashy and very well-intended investments around advanced manufacturing and ICT and all of those things. But one thing that is done here is a careers in education. And that is articulated with our CSU locally. And so when we think about these investments and you're talking to your college administration, please don't let them forget that we need a pathway to careers in our public service. And a big aspect of that is what Jeff alluded to, is that we have a shortfall and a demand for our teachers and our teachers' assistants and all of those folks. The district or county office of ed teacher internship program. So at Sacramento County Office of Ed, they offer single subject math, single subject science, multiple subjects, and educational specialists, mild to moderate. So there are opportunities within the Sacramento County Office of Ed that move beyond just careers in education and for our traditional pipeline of high school students, but how do we move adults into this as well? And where do they access this type of services? In those internship programs, candidates complete pre-service courses and required state tests, then 2 years of classroom internship with the County Office of Ed. A third one that I would like to talk about, and that I think is extremely important as we ramp up career education opportunities in our high schools and our adult education programs, we have this thing that requires a credential. And how do we get more people this credential? And so a CTE credential does not require a 4-year degree. It doesn't even require a 2-year degree. It requires years in terms of service in that industry, and then you, for example, a professional welder, and then enter the job, and they're a paraprofessional educator. So a system of support and CTE credential, although the Sacramento County Office of Ed does not offer that, there are county office of eds around the state that Sacramento works directly with to make sure that the CTE teacher has classroom coaching and CTE teachers and support in the region, but they clear that credential through another county office of ed. So the inner workings and the partnerships between our county office of eds and our high schools and adult education programs, that inner work in that and working together is important to get more educators teaching in our system.
Thank you.
I didn't answer number one.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
So I feel like I live the pathway world. I am one of 4 girls in our family. We're all in education. I'm the only one who started out as, my mom has a picture in kindergarten. I said I was going to be a teacher. I never veered from that goal. My 3 sisters all said they would do, actually the exact quote was, hell will freeze over before I go into education. And now all 3 are in education. So the sister that's after, I'm the oldest, the one after me is actually a community college, does a lot of recruiting through their honors college of underrepresented groups, and she funnels them into futures in education. The 3rd sister works for LA Unified, has worked in elementary, middle school, is currently working in an alternative high school for pregnant and parenting teens. And so she's the one that's in the trenches. She's the one that we go to. She was so just fed up with injustices that she was seeing in her school system that she decided to run for city council last year. Is the first Latina city councilwoman for Simi Valley. She works for LA Unified, works for Simi Valley. But it is so nice to have a teacher voice at that table representing the needs of teachers. And then the 4th one is actually working at a non-credit bearing community college. And so they are taking she's really looking at teachers from other countries who have come in, immigrated, and trying to make their way back into the teaching profession, and how can we support them. And they're starting out with the ESL classes and then helping us create pathways for how do we then help them enroll in teacher ed programs to get them back again in the classroom, because they have a wealth of experience. They share the culture with many of the students that they're working with, and so how can we do that? So this is not just in theory, and then I'm at the UC system now working with teacher ed, but also with a lot of doctoral students who want to be teacher educators. So it's kind of between the 4 of us, we have conversations often about how can we kind of make our worlds come together. So best practices. I think, first of all, we in the UC system, we have a deans and directors meeting every semester, so twice a year. And it's really important for us to have the deans there, because teacher ed programs and most of our UC programs are one of several programs, and often not the one that is getting most of the resources. So we really try to get the directors there, the deans there, to help administration see what are the needs of the teacher ed programs and how can they better support us in that. So I think that's one of the best practices, is thinking who needs to be at the table to have the conversations that need to be had, so that we have the support that we need to make those pathways more accessible. The other one is kind of the united vision and mission. So we talk about it in terms of what's the secret sauce. So what's the secret sauce that makes our program good? That we are how are we trying to meet the needs of the teaching force? And so I think being on the same page about what is that secret sauce, what is it that we're trying to pull together is a best practice. I'm coming into this program, as I said, 1.5 years now, and it had been a program. I love the program, but it definitely had a lot of band-aids of things as new regulations are coming on board, and now you have to add this class, or you have to meet this standard. It's like, well, we're going to add our generic numbers of 199 or 290. So we have a ton of 199 and 299 courses, because we really haven't gone back to see how are we going to hold this program together now that we've added all these things. So I think being on the same page and reimagining what that can look like really helps. And then looking into the programs to see what's worked. I'm currently working with the California Mini Corps program. Anybody familiar with California Mini Corps? Yeah. So it's a wonderful program. It's been around for many, many years. If you're not familiar with the program, and there's people here who could talk more about this than I could probably, but it's a program that it recruits students that come from migrant backgrounds or their families are migrant workers, and it pays them to tutor in schools that have high populations of migrant students. And so by the time they come into a teacher ed program, they have hours and hours of experience and mentoring, and they know that they want to be teachers. And think about the cultural capital and linguistic capital that those kids have. And so looking at, okay, what's working with the program, not that we want to, replicate, but what can we take from that and then apply it to other programs that can help us harness that community cultural wealth that we may not be looking into. So that's just one example of looking around and say what's working for whom, how can we partner. That is really, really valuable. And then professional development, making sure that we, again, as a UC system, what is it that's coming out of the research in terms of, for example, we have the Mind Institute at UC Davis, which is doing fabulous work on autism. So how can we provide teachers with the best support early on and expose them already in high school and high school, community college, and say, have you thought about these other pathways? Just teacher ed, but maybe the hook is, do you have a passion to serve a specific kind of population? And that's the hook to bring them into teacher ed. And then finally, systematic inquiry into who we are serving. So who are the K through 12 students? When we look at the demographics, they have really shifted. One of the exercises I have my students do is look at your school, look at the demographics, and now look at your school again and see, okay, well, look at your school from when you were there, and now look at it now, and look at how much it's shifted in terms of who that school is serving. So making sure we understand who our K through 12 students are, who are our teacher ed students. Our students are not the same students. Those students that are coming from rural parts of the state have very different needs as the students that are coming from Sacramento or are coming from more urban, from the Bay Area. I went out to community college it's the community college in Merced, the Los Baños, and I paid for parking. It was $1 for the day. And so then I can understand now when my students complain about parking at UC Davis, where it's, at least $14 for a day pass. All of a sudden it was a shock hit me. Okay, now I understand why this is such a burden when they're used to paying $1 for the day. So understanding the different cultures that our students are coming from, I think is really important. Looking at who are our school partners, what are the needs of the schools, and then what are the needs of the resident teachers? I think resident teachers often get left out, mentor teachers get left out of the equation, and they have a lot of connections also in the community that can help us recruit into special education. And finally, looking at our community partners and seeing what their needs are. One of the other partnerships that we recently are really trying to foster is with alternative education and seeing what are the needs in alternative ed. And a lot of the students that we're recruiting now into our teacher ed are interested in alternative education kind of sites. And so I think those are some of the best practices that we're trying to work into our programs at UC.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to respond a little differently because I'm not the program level. I work at the system level. And so what are some of the best practices for teacher preparation at the system level? We have organized the community college system in a framework of sectors and regions, and we use a regional approach to meet the needs of the type of occupations that are in demand in any given region. Of course, teachers obviously is something that's going to be across all regions. And so one of the things that we're doing right now is not so much looking at what we've done in the past in terms of best practices, but looking at how we can integrate what we already have in terms of the various funding streams, what are we already doing in terms of regionalism, and how do we move forward. Some of these things that you see as policy motions, one of them is in this article that I mentioned, it's SB 577. There's new funding for pilots and innovation. Yesterday's conversation with the labor agency was about, hey, how could we possibly break into using some apprenticeship models or earn and learn models in teacher preparation programs? Some of the questions were, in the student teaching year, could you potentially use that as a year in which you could integrate earn and learn models? So there's really a lot of opportunity right now to rethink and re-examine. I think what we need to see is what were the best practices, what's going on in terms terms of program areas, in terms of teacher preparation that we know that work, like IBEST, critical race theory-based CRT, or those types of theory-based approaches to teaching. I think we can still integrate those, but then how do we scale them at the rate? And I think there's a natural tension when we're thinking about this, when we're saying best practices at a statewide or regional scale, is how do you mitigate some of the tensions that exist? The need for volume, many more teachers, but also the need for quality in teachers, because those teachers having high quality are going to end up having better outcomes for our students because they're getting the appropriate training and teaching that they need to reach their goals. So as we think about that, how do we to do both, be able to scale but also be able to maintain quality? So there's a recruitment piece and there's also a development piece too. So teacher preparation isn't just about helping our students find their path to teachers. We also have to think about the teacher workforce itself that we have and how we professionalize them and invest in them and get their skills and readiness up so that they're relevant culturally, so that they're teaching in pedagogies that we know that are effective, and then they're adapting to new technologies that are coming like AR, VR, XR, and how will we be teaching in these types of things? The way that we've taught in the past, I think you can go all the way back to the Greeks with the Socratic method, and I think it'll stand, but then how do you integrate the technologies that are coming out, the fourth industrial revolution that we're seeing with new automation, robotics? How do we prepare students for things that don't today exist in the workforce, but that they will? And so then the second question is, how do we prepare our teachers to teach those students to be prepared for those things? My thoughts on it, just Jeff thinks that we have to have a paradigm of teacher-learner, learner-teacher. I think the students will adapt to the technology and will be perhaps ahead of our teachers in their comfort with it. And I think our teachers need to be open and willing to learn, so there has to be this dichotomy back and forth. So I think if you want to talk about best practices at a policy level, it's really about, can we support innovation in a way that does two things that we need? One, fulfill the demand, but two, maintain the quality that gives us the economic competitive edge as the fifth world economy.
I already did my best practices.
So what's number 2? Are we on number 2?
We are. Okay, so for our second question, we're going to have the panelists discuss how can systems work together to streamline the process for California's future teachers.
All right. Yep. So I'll go ahead and start. So how can we work together? Something that has predated my educational journey. I have a personal story that I won't share today, but the majority of that story revolves around a high school counselor telling me that I'm not university material. So it's a big reason probably why I'm in front of you guys today is that personal story has elevated me to a position of power where I can hopefully change that dichotomy of how we communicate to our kids and how we limit our students and their educational pathway. So a clear path articulated so that is clearly understandable but by the student, but also by the counselor that is providing the student guidance. We have a culture where our counselors are overworked. They have a broad swath of students that they have to serve, most of the time leading to minutes, if at all, meeting with the student at all. So how can we better articulate our pathways forward in providing a pathway into education? And so we need to clearly articulate what it is that you have to accomplish to become a teacher. And there are a lot of barriers in that. Our own superintendent admitted that credentialing is important, but it should not be a barrier. And so most oftentimes, the most influential teachers could come from a background where they didn't have learning support and they weren't able to overcome testing anxiety and dyslexia and things that a standardized test at the state level, even though we offer those modalities within our own education system, when someone goes and takes a test, those same modalities aren't offered to them in a testing profile. So they're instantly faced with a barrier that they've never had to face before, because we offer that in our educational system to help them get over those barriers. So we need to articulate coursework so that if someone does something somewhere, it also counts for credit elsewhere. And so that is between our own community colleges, that's articulations with our CSUs, that's reverse articulation. What if someone got halfway through a 4-year degree, wanted to be a teacher, they went off and worked for 15 or 20 years in an industry, and now they want to be a career education teacher, and the units that they took at a CSU or UC don't reverse articulate to our community colleges or to any kind of experience in their educational journey. So articulation, dual enrollment, whatever bad word you want to call it, we need to get over the fight about the definition of articulation and what dual enrollment is and labor negotiations, and do the work for what our students need. And the only reason that the lights get turned on every day at our job is because we are there to serve the student. So one of the most important aspects that we need to do to work together is that we need to offer these transferable classes that students can clearly follow. Offer incentives like tutoring jobs, priority enrollment, guaranteed interviews, salary credits for students enrolled in these pathways. This could also speed up time it takes to get teachers into the classroom. So when we talk about potentially having an apprenticeship program, an apprenticeship program is successful because it is clearly articulated. You can complete this amount of hours in the field, you do this education requirements, you are guaranteed to have this certification, this credential that certifies you to become a teacher. You don't go pass a state test that potentially your dyslexia or your learning disabilities or something. No, you did the work in the trenches. You did your time in the classroom, being a teacher's assistant, being a tutor, whatever that pathway is, and give them credit for it, and then allow them to exercise their skills and abilities to train our young people.
So everybody knows. Okay. We're all teachers, we gotta roll with this. I said in everything, so. I just got here. I didn't even do anything.
Oh my goodness.
Marquita, would you mind introducing yourself?
Of course. Good morning. Good morning. Well, travel's great when it works. How nice to see all of our partners in the room. I apologize for being late. I got there an hour early, plenty of time, and on the board it said canceled. So I'm Marquita Grenot-Scheyer. I'm the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Educator Preparation and Public School Programs. Office of the Chancellor of the California State University, and I have the privilege and the honor of working alongside deans and associate deans, I see a couple of them here, and our faculty and our system, to prepare educators for our diverse schools and communities. As you may know, the CSU prepares about 50% of the teachers in California, and depending upon the year, 8 to 10% of the nation's teachers. Our deans work together really, really well, and we're able to bring initiatives to scale quickly. And so this question up here about how our systems work together is really fundamental to the work that we do in the CSU. And I know about these partnerships in a very grounded way, having worked as a faculty member, associate dean, and a dean to help develop partnerships. And I'll give a pitch for a session that I and my colleagues are doing later when we're going to talk about the partnerships that were developed and a conceptual framework that I heard was already introduced that we think provide some great parameters for your work regionally. So, I don't know what my previous panelists' best practices for working together. Well, clearly, each of our systems have a role, and we have to work across the segments from preschool all the way to higher ed to ensure that we prepare the most diverse candidates. And so all of the CSUs have 2+2 partnerships with their community colleges. Some of the CSUs have developed articulated, streamlined ways to get from the 2-year college to the 4-year institution. And I know that we'll be talking about some of those components throughout the day. Our faculty work together to design the curriculum. They work together to advise students so that there is a seamless transition and articulation across the systems. And then most critically, we'll work really closely with our K-12 partners to develop and support those clinical sites where our mutual candidates can do their work together. So I think I'll stop there and see if my panelists have something else to say while I catch my breath.
So I wanted to ditto what my colleague said about the articulation agreements. I think we do have to pay less attention to the territorial kind of turf wars that we have and say, okay, what is best for the students? But I think it's more than that. It's really having conversations about what those courses that are going to transfer. I would love to say, these are the courses you can take at the community college, and these are the competencies that were met, so that I can easily put you into our program and know that the foundation is there. So I think I love the idea of the articulation agreements, but it's not just as easy to say, okay, we're going to accept these courses, but it's really being at the table to say, what can we agree to that's going to be covered in those courses at the community college so that we can make that transition seamless into our system. The other thing I wanted to mention is, again, I think that we all have to be on the same page and saying that we can't be everything to all people. And so I think it's about knowing the programs that our partners also offer. And the goal, the overarching goal should really be about how can we better recruit and support teachers. And that's okay if I'm going to send them to Sac State. I mean, I did a recruiting thing for Breakthrough Programs, which has a very diverse group of high school and college students that teach over the summer, so they have the potential to be bilingual teachers. And I had the privilege of going to their last day where they wanted to ask about teacher prep programs and feeling very comfortable saying, you know what, I think UC Berkeley's program would be the right one for you. I think that Cal State Sacramento would be the right program because you're looking for this, and that's one of their strengths, and we don't do that as well. Oh, UC Davis is a good fit for you because you're looking for this, and we have that. And so really being familiar with the programs that we have across our system with the same goal of recruiting and supporting for the California teaching force, and that's the foremost goal. But that means that we also have all our people who are in recruitment and in the support staff with that kind of same mindset that, again, the overarching goal should be the same one for all of us. And then I think another place where we can make it more seamless is my area of specialization is working with Emergent Bilinguals, the bilingual authorization. And by the time they get to us, and if they decide to go into teacher ed and pursue a bilingual authorization, they're having to do so much extra work in the program as compared to their peers because there's other things that they could have been doing that they didn't know about before they got to us. For example, we don't do a lot to support their bilingual academic language development so that they're comfortable teaching, let's say in Spanish, in a school setting. We just don't have time in the program to develop that proficiency. We have an initial exam that we give, oral and written, but that's pretty, write a letter to a teacher. You can do that. That's very different than saying teach biology about, whatever in Spanish. That's a very different skill set. So if we could have articulation with our community colleges where they offered, or our other partners, say Spanish for future teachers, where you're learning about how do you do the tildes and the accent marks in academic content that the teachers are going to need, that would be a dream, because then they would come into our program without us having to well, I should say having to. I would love to support them that way. We just don't have the time to do that in the time that we have the program available. Or even if you want to be a bilingual teacher, you need to take the CSET 5, which is a course on the history of pretty much all Latin America. It's, as well as some proficiency in terms of more cultural things that they probably are familiar with, but unless they've had a course in ethnic studies or Latino culture, it's a difficult test to take. If they could take that coursework before they come to us, that would be another way in which they can meet some of those authorization requirements that would help them get ahead of the game, and where we can definitely, I can see very fruitful partnerships. And that's just one example. You could take the same example and talk about special education or some of the other authorizations that are available but are so hard to fit in the kind of condensed program that we have in most of the UCs.
So the question is how to streamline process for future teachers in California. How many of you, by show of hands, are active participants in a community of practice in your region, working with others, and now those people in community practice? How much of that work is intersegmental? If it's intersegmental, wave at me. Okay, so that's the temperature. What we want is, in the future, more hands up and more action, because what needs to happen at the local level is the conversations. I think these are real, tangible recommendations you're making that could get done, but they have to be fed through a regional process or a community of practice to be able to know how to bolt it together on the ground. Articulation, I think, is an important comment. Sometimes these things happen because of relationships between one or two people, and when that person moves, retires, or otherwise goes away, that articulation goes away. We need to systematize it, and the best way to do it is from the ground up in the regional communities of practice. So I would really encourage you to connect today. Ask each other, hey, are you in a community practice? How do I get involved, and how can we get connected? There's a wealth of information that gets shared in these community practices. So I think it's an important, tangible activity that you could do when walking out of here that would help integrate the system. So that would be one way to streamline processes. Two, I think under this is something that I care about a lot, which is competency-based education. Are we reflecting on the teacher's occupation in terms of what the competencies are and what competencies would be needed for that? To what extent are we using digital badges to break down some of the barriers that come with whether you do or don't have a certain class, and have digital badged equivalencies? Have we even begun to consider other types of assessments or recommendations or recognitions of achievement beyond just the degree and the certificate, or the certifications that come with credentialing? So I want to give a little story of, it says, how do we streamline? This is my experience, right? I didn't become a teacher because when I was little I thought I would be. It's just little experiences like this in my life that happened. I'm like, hey, I really enjoyed that. And then it kind of led to more inquiry and eventually led to a career. When I was right out of high school, I went to CSU Monterey Bay. Now this was like its second year, so this is a pioneering event, right? So there wasn't a lot of system there. It was a young institution trying to grow. But what they had was some of these things of working together. I was taking a course, and if anyone knows anything about CSU Monterey Bay, they're interdisciplinary. They don't lay the classes out in your traditional disciplines, or it's kind of like I took a class. It was about culture. It was also about presentation, speech, and then it was also about going out into the field and doing field research. And that was my class. I don't even know what it was called, but that's what we did. And what happened was the professor who taught the class on cultural communication had a connection with Alisal in Salinas. I don't know if you've ever been to Salinas. Okay? Yeah? Mm-hmm. All right. Went out there as a young man, probably 19, 18 years of age, and the day that I arrived at Alisal, I was completely culture shocked, right? This is a completely Spanish-speaking school in the middle of the Central Valley there, and the day before, something happened that was interesting, right? There was a drive-by shooting at the school the day before. And so I'm here to come learn about culture, and I'm put into a trauma situation at a school. I wasn't the teacher, I was the observer to try to learn about public speaking and have a cultural experience, but it happened in a classroom. And what it kind of opened up to me was a different perspective of the classroom. Instead of being the participant, the student in the classroom, I was now the observer. And having that shift in mind, as well as the cultural experience of different values. I mean, in October they had Dia de los Muertos. I'm like, why do they have skeletons going on in the, this didn't make any sense to where I had come from, right? But why does this matter? Why am I telling the story? Because the systems work together. Someone at Monterey Bay, CSU Monterey Bay, had to talk to the district for Alisal Elementary School to allow me as a student to enter that campus, right? But what did it do? It kind of opened up an experience. How much of that happens organically? Probably a lot. I'm sure there's lots of really passionate teachers who make these connections. How can we systematize it so that it can happen at scale? Because what you do is you teach something beyond just teacher preparation. You teach connections about culture and difference, and you let yourself reflect on the others. And I think that's one of the most important outcomes of teaching and education, and we can talk about workforce and economics, and that's a frame, but there's also something about community, right? We represent the community colleges. And how do we understand who's in our community and what community means and who we can relate to and who we can't? And I think in this day and age, there's enough rhetoric going on that fractures that we have an opportunity in teacher preparation to restore it by having teachers who really fundamentally care, and I'll say the word love one another enough to create system connections that work together for meaningful experiences to allow people to grow. And that's my take on it. Great.
I quickly wanted to add about my articulation and working with one another is that everybody in the room, when I talk about that, is very familiar with it because we're in the system. I'm talking about outwardly portraying that. So we need a visual representation and a visual communication module that is not just understood by us, but it's understood by our communities. So that we need to harness our intellectual knowledge of our systems and effectively communicate it outwardly is a big part of that articulation or that agreement between institutions.
Should we move to the next question?
Yeah.
Yes, and I also want to hand out the questions that have been distributed for each of you, so you have a moment to look at the. We have quite a few questions.
Thanks, Renee.
staring at us. So let's move on to our third question. This is when the kindergarten teacher comes out and off the mic. So, what steps is your system taking to help to diversify the teacher pipeline? Equity is something that's at the forefront of all of our discussions right now. We'd love for your reflections on that. Thank you.
I think I'll go ahead and start. I know across our systems we are committed to ensure that our educator population reflects the students and the families that they will serve. And so at the CSU, we have a system-wide commitment to ensure that our candidates do reflect their students and their families. We're fortunate that students who are attracted and who are admitted to the CSU are a very diverse group of students reflective of California students. So about 50% of our students come from underrepresented groups. About 38% of our students are Latinx. We have a lot to do to ensure that we increase the percentage of African American students. And across our campuses, and I would invite you to look at our website. If you just go to CSU Teacher Education, you can look at each of the campuses in your region as you think about these communities of practices that was mentioned earlier, to find a campus and to read about the various ways that each of our campuses reaches into the community to recruit diverse candidates. Many of our campuses have Grow Your Own programs where we work with our middle school and high school partners to identify young people who maybe they haven't articulated an interest in becoming a teacher or a counselor or a school psychologist, but they have demonstrated a commitment to social justice principles. And so we want to capture them early. We want to have them successfully graduate from high school, come to one of our community colleges, and then again seamlessly transition into the four-year institution. We have a system-wide program called EduCore. It started at Sacramento State under the leadership of Dr. Ken Fudernick, and it's a way to look at our own undergraduates, again, who may not have demonstrated an interest in teaching yet, but have been identified by a faculty member on campus as someone who demonstrates a commitment to equity and excellence and social justice principles. And so we've done a lot of activities across the campuses to bring them into schools and colleges of education, to inculcate them into what it means to be a teacher. And we're seeing pretty successful results in these young people who are coming to us and then graduating. So those are a couple of ways that we're working. We are currently considering, and when I have deans and associate deans in the room, I have to make sure I tell the truth. We are currently, not just stories that sometimes I do, we are currently considering a system-wide initiative to more strategically invest in recruiting, supporting and preparing African American males into teaching. And so the deans just last week at our summer meeting received a set of data for each of their respective campuses where they were given the percentage of underrepresented students or candidates in their programs. And we're going to have a subsequent conversation about who wants to work with us at the system office to pilot this work and to see if we can't increase that percentage significantly. We all know the reasons why this is important to do. I don't think we need to go over that in this audience, but we have to figure out how to recruit more students of color and then to retain them. That's the other half of the puzzle. We get them in, and then we know that many of our students get into schools where they're not supported for a number of reasons. So how do we also work with our school district partners to ensure that we retain them, and that investment, that collective investment that we've made essentially pays off for the children and for the teachers. I'll stop there.
So I know a big is something that happens in the economy constantly, and that is pluck, pull, or steal someone from somewhere else, right? So one of the diversity pipeline things that the Sacramento County Office of Ed focuses on is classified employee pools. So what they are trying to do is they're recruiting from paraprofessional and classified employee pools and then paying the costs via grant funds to upskill those folks in their internship program. So they're using their current labor pool to find quality candidates that could have upward mobility in getting a better paid job, a full-time paid job, or something of that nature. So I know one of the tactics that is used, and I've heard this in other, just not at Sacramento County Office of Ed, but is using that. So I think working with teacher internship programs to make sure that teachers with prior work experience know about CTE credentials. There is a need for that. We have additional pathways being developed currently that there is going to be a shortfall. When I worked in adult education, one of the funding categories is career education training. Again, another shortfall in our adult schools that are tied to our high schools. So being able to have that outwardly positioned, it could be a simple flyer that goes to your classified pool of employees that starts planting the seed for them to potentially enter into the next phase of their career. And what also is beneficial for that is they're aware of the educational system. So the system in which they are employed, they will understand. And so I think that positions those new teachers to know where resources are, who's in charge of those resources so that they can advocate for their individual students in their classes so that they could get more resources. So with that comes the right coaching to be able to clear the credential. So there is work in that you need to make sure that you're not just recruiting them and then setting them on a trajectory, but that you have the support resources in place that coach them along to make sure that that transition happens, you're retaining them in your pipeline.
So I keep meaning to mention, we only prepared the UC 7% of the teacher education workforce in California, so we are definitely a lot smaller than our CSU partners. I wanted to comment on the grant support. I think that's a big role that the UC system can play because we do have the infrastructure. We have a big infrastructure to support the pursuing of grants and are partnering with districts to be able to provide those incentives, especially for like our paraprofessionals to then pursue a teaching credential. I think that's another role that we can help in terms of diversifying. We're having the debate about social justice and where we stand on that. And the debate goes along, do we interview and screen for people that are already social justice oriented to come into the program and that's the population that we work with? Or do we take all students and help them understand the role that they have as advocates? And so we've been using the terms equity and access, and we're in the middle of a conversation of if we're going to use the term social justice, what do we mean by it? Because what we're finding is that people have very different definitions about what social justice means. So if that's how we're going to, and it's not that we don't believe in social justice issues, it's just that we're using very different and sometimes contradictory definitions about what we mean by social justice. I think in terms of recruiting is also making sure that those that are out in the high schools and the community colleges see teachers and professors that look like them, and that they see this as a possibility. And when we say recruiting the pipeline, we're just not talking about recruiting to the K through 12, but what additional opportunities can we provide for them after they are in the classroom for a while, understand. So if they have dreams of going into administration, into higher education, can we also support them on that and not just stopping at let's get them into the schools, but really making sure that when there are conferences on leadership, that they're also represented at that table and we create that pipeline. I think I'll give one other point here in terms of financial support for a lot of when we've been trying to diversify with African American teachers. They commented on two things. One is that they feel very alone in the program when they are maybe 2 out of 150. So how can we tie them into other support systems that already exist in the community? So we've been partnering with the Black Teachers Project out of Oakland to say, okay, there's an additional mentoring network that we can connect you to that we can't provide here because we just don't have it yet. And then financial, so a lot of what I've been doing is philanthropy work. In my new role, it's amazing how much time I have to spend with donors, but it's important work because if we go to them and say, you know what, if you provided this additional scholarships, then we could incentivize more diverse pools of students coming into, and it's not a long-term solution, but in the short run, it's helping us with diversifying if we can target those scholarships to help teachers from underrepresented groups.
Can I make another comment before we move to the questions? I want to emphasize the importance of financial assistance and scholarships and forgivable loan programs for all of our students, but particularly students from underrepresented groups who we know need financial assistance for a number of reasons. And so within the CSU, across all our higher ed segments, there are a number of ways to ensure that we are supporting our students throughout the program. I also just saw Terry Clark there, and I would be remiss if from the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, yay, your fans are here, if I didn't talk about the recent investment that our state has made in residency grants throughout California, which we know residency programs really retain teachers longer, and they prepare them in in a qualitatively different way. And so our state has demonstrated its commitment to addressing the teacher shortage by investing in these residency grants throughout the district. And so many of our districts and our CSUs are engaged in that work and developing these new residency programs. So I didn't want to not say that. Where's Renee? Should we?
We've received a pretty diverse group of questions,
Yes.
and we only have about 5-6 minutes left.
Okay.
But I'm thinking that maybe we can figure out a way to still get the information out to everybody, if that's okay. So if each of you can maybe touch on maybe one of the questions or somehow embed a couple together. Thank you.
I'll be quick. So one of the questions I received is how can more regional consortia be encouraged to support public sector and teacher pathways with strong workforce dollars? Excellent question. So decision makers within regional consortiums are held to outcomes. So you need to put data in front of them and the potential of return on investment. So they need to know what Jeff has shared is the teacher shortage within your region. What the supply, so you have your demand of how many that you're lacking or that you need, how many those colleges or in your area are currently supplying, so CSUs, UCs, how many are actually coming out of your area, and that will show you the need. You need to put that need in front of the decision makers, and you need to position how they will accomplish those, how they can accomplish those needs within their system. So it's really important to put the information in front of them, plant the seed, and then help direct them or lead them to this. For example, we took a 7-county snapshot in Sacramento about public service. 24% of the jobs in Sacramento are public service. A large part of them are teacher jobs. So that information is going to be put in front of our decision makers time and time again until we start seeing investment in those. The other question real quick is about, or what do we know about County Office of Ed's credential program and how to successfully support intern teachers to quote unquote retain them. Let me see how I'm going to put this. Treat them better. Pay them better. Give them perks. Help them with life situations. They are making this transition for the betterment of their family, most likely, and we all know that life gets in the way. So you have to help them bridge those gaps as they're going through those internship programs, and don't treat them lesser than someone that went through a traditional pipeline for credentialing.
Okay, I want to say these are all amazing questions because every single one of them is solution oriented. So whoever wrote these, you guys are awesome. What I want to acknowledge is Raul Arambola, Dean Raul Arambola. He's here from our Education Services Division. And I could literally just hand these cards to him, and these could be exercisable activities. So some of these things are, how do we upgrade the AA for transfer for elementary education? We could have that conversation. Here's another one. How do we support teacher preparations engaging with CDE? A short answer is we're writing the Career Technical Education Plan now. Can that inform other parts of CDE's planning besides just career technical teachers, but also, your teachers more broadly? So that could be implemented now. How about articulation high schools, transfer to community colleges and onto CSU? I'm going to say guided pathways. If you're not, how many people are familiar with the guided pathways movement? Yeah, ooh, that's awesome. Did you see that, Shani? Almost everybody raised their hand. So I think the answer in short is that the better we can articulate pathways intentionally through the guided pathways movement, will answer some of these questions. Dual enrollment, I think we hit on it, but yep, we could work. There's middle college. And then how do we talk about even some of the ideas around doing a bachelor's degree level at the community colleges? We had some of those bachelor degrees pilots go through. Again, that's with, who does that? It's who holds? Who is it? Okay, so we could circle back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get with Raul on each of these solution-minded recommendations. I'm not going to take them as questions. I'm going to take recommendations and see how many of these we can tangibly do or possibly come up with a pilot or two. Following up on your strong workforce, I have another report. This one's the Bay Area report. So there was a mention of the Sacramento report. There's also a Bay Area report on teachers, right? So this is how you get strong workforce money. The first step in getting strong workforce money is show the need. You have to show a supply and demand conversation. You can contact our centers of excellence to get that. Once you've made the case, then you work with your regional consortium chair. This is our friend from the North Far North. We have 8 regions. Yep. So find your regional chair and then work and advocate for the prioritization of the funding of those through the strong workforce. Now I want to be clear, strong workforce is not all of our money. We have Perkins, EWD, we have set-asides for nursing, and we have set-asides, of course, for teacher preparation. So we can braid those funds. So the more familiar you are with the palette of funds we have available and the stronger your relationships are in your region and the regional consortium, the more likely these types of things can come to the forefront, data-driven, evidence-based, and then we'll make those investments with you. So to all those who wrote little notes to me, I will work with Raul. That's my commitment.
I think we're almost at the end, but we're talking about investing in teacher preparation, and I would be remiss if I did not announce, it's been in the newspapers, but perhaps you haven't read, that our Chancellor White, has reaffirmed his commitment recently to addressing the teacher shortage by doubling the amount of funding that had been going to the CSU to develop STEM teachers. So the initiative is called the Math and Science Teacher Initiative, or MISTI as it's affectionately known. And the state legislature back in 2005 allocated $2.7 million on an annual basis to produce additional STEM teachers. Our chancellor, recognizing the need to continue that work, has made a commitment. It's a 4-year commitment of $10 million over the next 4 years to essentially double the number of math and science teachers and computer science teachers. So again, the deans are working together in terms of how we continue our efforts to address the teacher shortage.
I had 2 questions. So the first one was UC's extension programs also provide credential services. Are those programs coordinated throughout the state and integrated with UC offerings? And the answer is not right now, but we have a deans and directors meetings at the end of September, and I'll be putting this on the agenda. So I think it's an important issue that we need to address. The second question was, can you provide solutions for districts to deal with this teacher shortage in the short term that does not include hiring emergency credential teachers? Students taught by untrained teachers is not good for our students. So we're dealing with this on multiple levels. The other thing that we have happening a lot is our student teachers get put into classrooms and then they get on the sub list and then they're being asked to sub extensively. So they get to their resident teacher placement and they're being told, go to room 22 because we need a sub in there. And so it's an issue that we are trying to address systematically in terms of, yes, the number of emergency credential teachers, but also who is mentoring the teachers and actually how much mentoring are they getting in terms of their student teaching. So I don't have a quick quick solution to this, but know that we are working on it on both fronts in terms of how can we better support the student teachers that we have in those placements that have teaching shortages and have a lot of teacher absenteeism, and also, yes, how can we deal with the emergency credential? And if we do have emergency credential, so we're working with one particular school right now in a neighboring district here who have 6 teachers. So it's an elementary school with 6 teachers on emergency credentials. So they've reached out and say, can you provide support for these teachers as they're going forward? And so we have created a learning community for those teachers. We're going to integrate them. They're going to be able to audit one of our master's classes where they can get additional support. And so we are trying to provide support as a service when we can to schools that are dealing with high numbers of these emergency credential teachers.
Well, I would like us all to come together to give this panel a huge round of applause, please. Thank you so very much. Thank you.